Krista. Now I subscribe to too many YouTube channels, like over 100, but a lot of those are cooking channels, and they only post like once or twice a month. Now obviously these food vlogs differ a lot in terms of what they choose to cook and how they choose to prepare it, but also in terms of their attitudes to food. Some folks talk about food like it's a necessary evil, or a trick to play on children, or something good and delicious, or an enactment of their culture. There are all sorts of different attitudes about food, but also attitudes about hygiene in regards to food. There are Japanese vloggers that I know that won't handle chicken unless they are wearing gloves. There are American vloggers who encourage me to, if I'm going to soak dried beans, that I put them in the fridge overnight because we don't want any microbes growing in there. Whereas there are folks in India cooking those same sorts of legumes, but instead soaking them in warm water at a room temperature or above in order to encourage the microbes on them to grow and ferment them, such that they will give their batter a nice sour and sort of effervescent feel. So I thought it would be fun, in the spirit of YouTube cultural exchange, to step out of my cultural comfort zone and grow some fermentation friends. So I got some red splint lentils and some white rice, and I put them under warm water, and I put them in my oven under the pilot light. And because we have a gas-fired oven, the pilot light runs all night, and it will keep them nice and warm for the next 6 to 8 hours until I decide to make me some vegetable pancakes. Truth to tell, that's not that far outside my comfort zone because I've fermented all sorts of things before, but there are loads of things even in the dominant culture that we expect to be fermented on an industrial scale. If the sauerkraut on your hot dog were just boiled cabbage, you would wonder why it was on your hot dog. Likewise, if the only pickles you've ever been exposed to are just the ones that are pickled in the jar, you should really get your hands on a properly fermented pickle, because that shit is delicious. And it's not just like how some people prefer table salt to sea salt. There are genuine chemical differences, and these differences vary from bacterial culture to bacterial culture. So each individual fermentation experience reveals a slightly different result, which is why one vintage of wine varies from another. Yes, I believe it's nigh on impossible to talk about fermentation without talking about alcohol, not only because it's my favorite fermented beverage, but also because it's culturally ubiquitous. Almost every culture that has developed agriculture has developed some form of concentrated alcohol or alcoholic beverage. Even loads of horticultural and pastoral societies had some way of obtaining a concentrated source of alcohol. But even for societies that didn't develop a concentrated source of alcohol, that is, deliberately fermenting products in order to produce an alcoholic effect, loads of alcohols are present in lacto-fermented and other fermented products. So, a couple weeks ago I was at the store buying some Kombucha, which is a fermented tea product, because I'm from Eugene and health food seems natural, and the fella asked for my ID, because it turns out some kombucha is alcoholic. I mean, of course it's alcoholic, because kombucha is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, or SCOBY, and the yeasts produced alcohol in the same way that they do when you're fermenting beer. But the bacteria present, acetobacter, the same bacteria that are responsible for producing your vinegars, they then process the alcohol into acetic acid. But unless you boil off the excess alcohol or ensure that there are loads of bacteria present, it's very difficult to ensure that 100% of the alcohol is going to be digested by the bacteria. So some companies, instead of boiling their product, have just started offering it as a somewhat alcoholic beverage. It has usually less than 1% alcohol by volume, but some alcohol present. So you were required to show your ID, which would be totally fine if I did not then learn that my ID had expired. It took me 2 weeks to get a copy of my birth certificate so that I could then go to the DMV and take this terrible photo. But in spite of all of that, I still love fermentation. Krista, I will see you on Monday.